All right, so still on lecture series number 4, which is project proposal writing and presentation. So in this screencast, we're just going to wrap up or finalize this lecture series by discussing the last component, which is nothing more than just a few guidelines associated with the proposal presentation. At some stage, very, very soon, we are going to have to essentially present our project proposal. And so the idea behind this screencast or this part of the lecture series is to give us pointers on what sort of things to look out for as we are presenting. And granted, again, this is probably going to be more like revision. I would like to think that we have done this in the past. In second year, I think in 2034, you must have gone through a process of presenting the research projects that you are working towards. Most of this is probably going to be stuff that obviously maybe discussed in other courses really. But we just thought it would be important to highlight some of these things. We're just going to start off by highlighting the importance of how to effectively communicate ideas to people, right? Formally, actually. It turns out that presenting work that you've done, right, especially research-oriented work, is extremely important in that it helps spread ideas, right? When you communicate what you're thinking, what you've done with other people, what you're implicit or explicitly doing really is sharing those ideas with other people. And in the case of 3020, what this whole process is aimed at doing is to teach us exactly how to work as part of a larger team, right? Which is why we're working in packs here. Something that a number of students that we've interacted with in the past normally struggle to grapple with is this idea that it's meant to help you, right? When you present your work to a larger group of people, you are more likely to get useful feedback in the form of advice from those people and to a certain extent support, right? So part of what you should expect from this proposal presentation is feedback that's at the very least feedback that's going to come through from Lighton on how you can better improve what you're planning to do, what you're proposing to do. We must also remember that there's going to be life beyond 3020, and in fact there's life beyond UNZA, right? Once you get out there, you find yourself doing a lot of public speaking, right? Some of you probably end up like Lighton teaching, and so you want to develop these communication skills that are going to obviously become useful once you get to that stage. It's also a way of trying to pick up on new techniques and ideas or new developments in the field, really, right? A reminder again that for us, one of the reasons why we're doing this is we're trying to set the stage for 4014, right? So this is like practice for us. We are practicing for what's coming our way in 4014, right? But fundamentally, really, we are trying to get feedback on this work that we are doing, right? And it turns out that sometimes when you're only interacting with people that are intimately involved with the project, you tend to be, those people tend to be more biased towards the project, right? So you want to speak to people that have little to do with the project so that they give you I guess an objective view of what it is you're working towards, right? So the idea behind this really is that if you periodically speak to people that are a part of what you're doing, you're less likely to get positive feedback because the people will typically be biased towards whatever it is you're doing, right? But when you speak to individuals that are not linked to the project, you're more likely to get feedback. So besides Lighton, obviously you're more likely to get feedback from your colleagues in class, and hopefully, I guess once we set the stage for when the proposal is going to be presented, we should be able to invite a few other people that might possibly positively contribute to the presentations. At the moment, the actual assignment associated with the presentation, I think, hasn't yet been, I don't know if we've uploaded it yet. It's probably not there, but I should create it. I'm wondering why I didn't. But the only guidelines that are there to do with the duration of the presentation itself, and the sort of content that you should include in the presentation. I think we have 10 minutes or something. So what you want to do in the presentation, the whole idea of the presentation is you want to draw people's attention to what you're doing, right? It's meant to be a summary of, hopefully, a summary of content that is available somewhere else. And in this case, this content that you're going to be presenting on would be available in your proposal document, right? So that 8-page proposal document would need to be summarized in such a way that you're able to convey the message in that document within 10 minutes, right? And so what you want to do is you want to focus on the more important aspect of the document. And a good starting point really is to think of the key ideas associated with your project, right? This is what most people refer to as the golden thread, right? So what is the key idea? And then you build up on the key idea itself. In the process, so you want to, something else you want to do is you want to always anticipate the sort of questions that people ask, right? If you anticipate questions that people ask, you're better placed to come up with these key aspects or elements that you'd want to include in your proposal. And of course, I mean, you want to make sure that, seeing as this is a summary, you want to make sure that it's appropriate for both experts and non-experts in whatever field you're working in, right? So the basic structure of the proposal is you should obviously have some sort of context, right? So an introduction of sorts, and then you introduce the main ideas of what you're talking about. You include specific details of what you plan to do in this case, because it's a proposal presentation, and then you conclude, right? Short and easy. Just to mention here that the expectation is that everybody that is a part of the group is going to participate in the presentations. Marks will be deducted if people don't participate. So I want to make sure that you participate in this. All right, hopefully this is helpful. And in terms of the slide layout here, you should remember that a presentation is actually meant to be a guide. It's meant to remind you of the things that you're supposed to talk about, right? So you shouldn't really. Usually people make the mistake of doing things that are considered bad form, for instance, so far as presentations are concerned, like adding a lot of text to the presentation slides. You want to avoid that. So just make sure that you design your presentation slides in such a way that they're able to draw people's attention to what you're talking about, because that's the whole point, right? You are conveying an idea to people. The thing you want to do is to ensure that people pay attention as you're presenting. So some techniques that you can take advantage of, obviously, here is you want to avoid too much text, right? Instead of text, use a lot of images. And I'm sure you've probably seen, this is slide number 33. You've probably seen this in a number of my slides, right? I always have a lot of visuals, right? I rarely have slides where you have a lot of text, right? Of course, I mean, if these are lecture notes or lecture slides, you're bound to, the expectation is that some of the slides are supposed to have notes, right? But the key thing here is you want to make sure that you use text sparingly. You want to use the appropriate font sizes and the font face. Make sure that you have a lot of graphs and screenshots and plots, pictures, right? That will help put the point across. That will help remind you of what it is you need to talk about. Right? They always say that there's certain rule of thumbs, like typically allow 2 to 3 minutes per slide, right? When you read up online on effective presentations, what people will sometimes advise is that you approximately have you spend 1 minute per slide. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if we are saying you're going to be given 10 minutes to do a presentation, then you should not have more than 10 slides. right, when you prepare this presentation. Also, because you typically have very little time to convey this idea to people, you want to make sure that you avoid things that require a lot of mental effort, right? So usually, unless if it's absolutely necessary, you want to leave out details to do with the source code, for instance, or details to do with mathematical equations that are associated with what you're doing, although the math part is not applicable to what we're doing. So the first slide, obviously, should be your title slide. It should have information identifying the presentation, and so the title must be there. It should have details. In the case of 3020, it should have identifying information associated with all the presenters. In this case, your full names and your student IDs, the date of the presentation. Observe, slide number 34. In all my presentations, I always have my name there, contact information, right? I always have dates, right? For lectures, I'll typically not have dates on the title slide, but for these other presentations that I give to public audiences, other public audiences, I'll typically have the date of the presentation itself, right? So the title should be on the title slide should have the title, identifying information of all the group members associated with that group project, and the date of the presentation. In certain instances, maybe as the second slide, you want to include an outline of the presentation, right? So a guide of what sort of things you're going to talk about in the presentation. And observe, I always have an outline in my presentations, right? To help people, or to give people an idea of what sort of things they should anticipate as I'm walking them through the presentation, right? Very useful, actually. Okay. So something else that you want to obviously ensure you do is that you should make sure that your presentations have numbers, right? You should make sure that the types of graphs that you include in your presentations are legible, right? They should be clear enough, and best way to do this is to make sure that you use appropriate file formats. So PNG is usually better for these, right? High resolution pictures are better, right? You want to make sure that when you're integrating images into the presentation itself, you want to make sure that you scale them up to such a point that they're visible enough to people that are going to be present as you're giving the talk itself. And then again, you want to make sure that you use the appropriate font sizes. Now, if you go up online, what people do is they'll recommend that you ensure that the smallest font size that you have is somewhere in the order of, is it 20 or 20 points, right? What I do myself is I stick to, I think the smallest size I normally work with is 20, I think, or is it 18? So level 1 headings in my case are always 20, right? 20 points. Level 2 is 18, right? From experience, this is usually it's usually visible enough in most of these lecture venues that I normally find myself doing my presentations in. But of course, my titles will be slightly larger in size here. I mean, the slide titles, notice it's 28 points. Okay, you always want to remember that in an ideal case, when you're doing a presentation, some of the audience members might be sitting at the far back of the room. So you want to make sure that they're able to see what it is you're presenting, right? The last thing you want to do is to use the same font size that you use in your normal document, right? While this is accepted, it's acceptable in a document like this, or a document 11 points is accepted here, it's something that you want to avoid in a PowerPoint presentation because it won't be visible enough. So some more pointers on how to, I guess, deliver more effective talks here. It's usually a good idea, and I don't know if this is going to be some of these things are going to be applicable, seeing as maybe the presentations are going to be done remotely, right? COVID-19 here is really messed up a number of these things, but you always want to make sure that you show up at the venue in good time, and maybe this will be applicable. So once we set up the date for when presentations are going to be done, as a group, you want to make sure that you join the meeting, the Google Meet meeting, way in advance. Hopefully, maybe 10 minutes before the talk starts, right? The last thing you want to do is to be late. If you're giving a talk in a really more formal environment and normal circumstances, what you'd want to do is also make sure that you dress appropriately, right? You want people to take you seriously. Yeah, so make sure you dress appropriately, put on the an appropriate attire. The last thing you want to do is you come in flip-flops, for instance, untucked, unkempt hair, right? You want to fix all those things. Formal, or is it what smart casual they call it, is usually best, right? So you also want to make sure that the presentation slides are in the appropriate format. From my experience, I've never gone wrong with PDF. I always export my presentation in PDF format because I know that with PDF, I can literally use this presentation on any machine. If I happen to find myself in an unfortunate position where my computer is no longer working, for instance, or fails to work on that particular time, I can easily transfer my PDF slides and I know they'll be able to work on a completely different machine. But also, in most of these instances, what will typically happen is you most likely have one computer that is used for various presentations. So if you find yourself in a situation where you are supposed to do a presentation as part of, there are other groups that are supposed to be doing that presentation, what the organizers of that particular event will do is they'll insist that you use the same machine. If you're using the same machine, you have no control over this type of software that will potentially be installed on that machine. You're better off using a format that is more universal. PDF, you never go wrong with PDF. Now, I've found myself attending events where someone had like some slide that was in PowerPoint, and then they open it up in a completely different machine, and the alignment of the text is just messed up, right? So to avoid that, you probably want to use a universal format such as PDF. You never go wrong by exporting your slides in different formats, right? So you can choose to export your presentation slides in PDF. You can export them in PowerPoint, for instance, if you want. If you're using LibreOffice Impress like myself, you can export these using ODP, right? And the idea behind all of this is that you have a fallback plan, right? So you get to choose which sort of format you're in. And now I know some people would probably raise the issue of animations, for instance. Yes, if you export to PDF, you wouldn't really be able to to use your fancy animations, but that's something else you want to avoid really in a formal presentation, right? And then also, you want to pay particular attention to things like the aspect ratio associated with your presentation slide. Now, if you aren't aware already, modern day projectors will typically use a 16:9 aspect ratio. In fact, modern day devices like your smartphones are implemented using the same aspect ratio, which is why you're able to consume certain content better when you flip your phone horizontally, for instance, right? So in terms of the presentation, because you typically will not have control over the type of projector that you're going to be working with, you want to make sure that you possibly export your PDF documents in two of the most widely used aspect ratios. 6:9 is the more modern one, 4:1 is the old one, right? If you notice, most of my slides, by the way, will normally, excuse me, most of my slides use a 16:9 aspect ratio. And you can easily check this by just, can I do this? If you go under properties, you notice that I'm using landscape, which is custom. If I go to Google Slides, which is what I use, and I go to page setup, you notice that I'm using a 16:9 aspect ratio, right? When you're creating these slides, it's not 4:1, by the way, it's 4:3. When you're creating these slides, when you're, I need to change this. When you're creating these slides, most of these software tools will provide you with a mechanism to specify the aspect ratio of the presentation that you're creating, right? It's usually under page setup or something. I don't use LibreImpress a lot here, so can't quite remember exactly where that particular option is. I wonder if it's could it be not layout properties? No, I thought it was under format though. That's unfortunate. It's not. I'm a bit restless. I need to I wonder if it's under settings, not slideshow settings, but maybe it's under properties actually. Boom, it's under properties, right? So notice under page setup here, I get to choose, because this is coming from an external application, which is why the format says it's user defined. But I could just as well have said I want it to be 4:3, right? If it's 4:3, then the format sort of like changes. And you notice that the orientation has somewhat been it's messed up actually right now. So maybe if I could undo this, it goes back to what it was, right? So by default, what I do myself is I use a 16:9 aspect ratio, just because from experience in the past, my presentations are actually much more visually appealing if I use the modern day aspect ratio of 16:9, really. And typically most of these modern projectors will have a setting that allows you to switch between these different settings. So you can configure your project in such a way that it's able to display 4:3 aspect ratio, a 16:9 aspect ratio. But in the unfortunate event that you find yourself giving a talk that makes use of one of those old projectors that only has a 4:3 aspect ratio, then it would be a good idea for you to have different versions of slides exported in different formats. Now, if you notice, right, most of my slides are named -16:9. This is a constant reminder to myself to say this particular batch of slides or this particular presentation has a 16:9 aspect ratio. I'll typically have other slides that have a 4:3 there, right? So it's just it's a cue to me to remind myself that this particular presentation is exported in this format. And then that way, if I'm at a venue where I discover that the 16:9 aspect ratio is not going to be visually appealing on the project I'm using, then I'll fall back to the 4:3 aspect ratio. Right? Okay. Something else you want to do as a group is don't commit suicide by just going to give your talk without rehearsing. You want to rehearse it, especially if you're going to give your presentation as part of a larger group. Right, you want to make sure that the different parts of the presentation are properly synchronized, right? So if speaker number one is going to do the introduction, description of, the title slide and the introduction, then you want to make sure that as the second speaker takes on, there's that seamless transition. And you only be able to do that if you practice, right? So you want to make sure you practice. One of the reasons you want to practice also is to make sure that you adhere to the prescribed time. If they say you're given 10 minutes to do your presentation, the last thing you want to do is get to a stage where you have 1 minute left and you've only covered maybe half the content of the presentation, right? It's a bad idea. So practice, 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 practice. Right, I thought it would be helpful for me to just talk about some of the just discuss tooling, right, involved with presentations, some of the tools that you can use to take advantage of creation of the presentation slides. Again, granted, similar to the proposal component, there's a strict requirement on what sort of tool you're going to use. You need to use Google Slides, right? But this part of the presentation is meant to just highlight the fact that there are, as with most software applications, really, there's a wide variety of tools that you can use, right? And it turns out that the choice of the tool that you use to create a presentation is it's actually dependent on a number of things. In the case of 3020, the tool that you have to use would need to make it tremendously easy for you to work as a group, right? To collaborate with each other. Some other things that you might want to look to take into account is the ease of use, right? Is the learning curve too much, or is it manageable, right? And again, these are linked to the amount of time that you have to create the presentation, I guess. But it turns out that once you learn how to use a particular tool, with time you develop a sort of expertise around that area, and so I mean, you still get to benefit from it irrespective of whether the learning curve would be too steep or not, right? So I already touched on collaboration, right? And also some other things to take into account is the quality of the presentation, the output itself that you come up with, right? And perhaps to a certain extent, the ease with which you can integrate or incorporate other added services to whatever software tool you're using. So are you able to pull external things easily to the tool that you're using? I'll give you an example of Google Slides. One of the things I like about Google Slides is I can easily incorporate things like diagrams, for instance, mathematical equations, right? Because some of these add-ons that I use latch on to external services that are extremely useful, right? Aesthetics, right? Is the output visually appealing? In the past, when I'm obsessing a lot about creating visually appealing presentation slides, especially when I'm presenting work to an international audience or a group of experts. I would typically use a tool like LaTeX Beamer, for instance, just because it seamlessly integrates. It makes it possible for me to really seamlessly integrate these other components into my presentation. So things like graphs and plots, right? And really the final output is usually very aesthetically pleasing. Okay, so just a quick walk through some of the tools that you have available at your disposal. I mentioned LaTeX Beamer, right? It's a class, it's a LaTeX class, essentially. Really nice. The learning curve is quite steep, actually, if you're doing this for the first time, but once you learn how to use it, you really appreciate the final output that you get. So what you get back is a high quality document, really. That's aesthetically pleasing, really. It's usually very useful when you are dealing with content that has a lot of mathematical content, right? And then also integration of things like graphs and charts is extremely good. Over the last couple of years, I've gravitated more towards Google Slides, specifically because it's cloud-based, right? So saving content, I don't have to worry about backup of documents or presentation slides that I produce. Now, I know what people are thinking already. Say, well, but why don't you use Dropbox? Yes, I use Dropbox, but I'm just saying, right? But also collaboration, right? I'm able to easily collaborate with people, right? Very easy to use tool here. It's your usual point and click. It's unlike LaTeX where you have to write markup, right? There's no point and click with LaTeX. So this thing is tremendously easy to use. And one of the reasons why we are prescribing, again, not recommending, we're prescribing that you use Google Slides is because you're collaborating with other people, right? But there's also, I guess, something that a lot of us are probably familiar with. This is probably what we were taught in 1020, although no, for this particular group I taught you 1020 and I introduced you to Google Slides, if people remember, in 2018. Right, we used to meet in NELT, right? I remember. It's just a shame that I hadn't yet started recording my lecture series then. I would have pointed you to proof that we actually discussed Google Slides. But there's PowerPoint. Don't know why people still use this thing, but I just put it there just in case. And then another option is, if you are like me and you obsess a lot with free and open source software tools, you can consider LibreOffice Impress. Beautiful application. I've used this for a couple of years now, and I find it extremely useful. I occasionally use it if I am wanting to do something that I cannot do in Google Slides. Now, even though I can work offline in Google Slides, but there are certain instances where I know that I would need offline access to a document. What I do is I'll export it to ODP and then import it within LibreOffice Impress, and then I can edit the document from within here, right? Once I edit this, I can either export it to PDF or optionally I can re-import it to Google Slides once I reconnect to the internet, right? So very wonderful tool. I use this quite a lot. It turns that you can also import Microsoft PowerPoint documents from within LibreOffice Impress. I'm not sure if Microsoft PowerPoint can import ODP files, but I do know that Impress can import PPT and PPTX files. All right. So I guess one of the key things here is that this thing is open source and freely available, right? No need to think about cracked versions of the software. So just to showcase the look and feel here, these are all like old documents. This was authored, I guess, in 2018, I think 2 years ago or something. This was done in 2012. This was 8 years ago, right? This was done in Beamer. It looks more aesthetically pleasing, in my opinion, than the one authored in Google Slides, but of course, it's my own subjective view. If you are interested in getting a sense of how draw comparisons on the output from these different files, I do encourage you to, if you just search for Light on Piri SlideShare. I have a number of documents that I authored in, a number of presentation slides that I authored in, that I've authored in using these different tools. So I have a few presentation slides authored in Google Slides, a lot of them in Google Slides increasingly, but some of them I've authored using, or I've created using LaTeX Beamer. Some of them I've created using LibreOffice Impress. So if you go to my SlideShare account, you should be able to and go to the, I have 40 presentations. I think I should upload more here. You should be able to hopefully be able to have a feel of how these different presentation slides look like. Now, granted, I mean, it's not like I tag these documents as being ones created using Google Slides and Beam and whatnot, but the more recent documents were created using, these ones are created using Google Slides, but the older ones, right? The older ones are actually created or were created using LaTeX. So I have quite a few presentations, older presentations, like I know this is all Google Slides. That's Google Slides, but I have documents like, I know this is Google Slides as well. But this is LibreOffice Impress. This was a short, just a short post, I suppose, if you can call it that. Just one slide. Yeah, but if I click more, the older presentations that I have were actually created using LaTeX. So this is LaTeX there, right? Maybe the title slide is It doesn't really inspire using LaTeX, but if you go through the presentation, you'll be able to appreciate the look and feel of LaTeX. And this is created using LaTeX. This is again using LaTeX as well. This is LaTeX, but anyway, so the key thing is is that the choice of tool really doesn't matter. It all boils down to a number of factors: learning curve, the sort of features that are supported by that particular tool, right? These are things to think about in the future. So some few closing remarks tied to 3010 here. Like I said, there's a prescription. The slides, the presentation slides must be presented, must be prepared using Google Slides. And all group members must participate in the creation of the slides. You probably lose marks if you don't participate. And all of this must take place in the shared Google Drive for your respective groups. You will be given 10 minutes to do your proposal presentation, and an additional 5 minutes will be reserved for questions, right? So each group will be allocated 15 minutes. You want to keep that at the back of your minds as you're preparing your slides. And then in terms of submission, we'll expect that you put a copy. You will leave a copy of the Google Slides within the shared Google Drive, and then the PDF document will be uploaded to the Moodle. PDF document must also be left within the Google Shared Drive. All right, so we just really just walked through a few guidelines associated with the proposal presentation. Hopefully this is useful to get you started as you begin to prepare the presentation, the proposal presentation. It's due on the 26th, so sorry about that. So you really want to work on this. If I were you, I'd start working on this immediately, right? All right, so just to wrap up, really, we thoroughly went through the process of, I didn't have the last slide here. We went through a few things here that are fundamentally tied to the project proposal. I will be scheduling an online interaction very soon, hopefully this week, if not then next week. And I expect people to ask questions as you're working through the proposal. So the next lecture series is going to be lecture series number 5, which is requirements engineering. All right, thanks, and enjoy the proposal writing and proposal and creating the proposal presentation slides. Thank you.